I am Alexei Bolokov. Today, we are discussing the recent statements made by Donald Trump, and joining me for this conversation is journalist and political analyst Wacław Radziwinowicz. Mr. Radziwinowicz, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Good to be here.
Good day. We will also be discussing the ongoing NATO summit, currently taking place in The Hague. I have the impression that NATO member states are arming themselves and clearly positioning against Russia. But is this impression misleading? What do you think?
I would approach this from a different angle. I would like to draw special attention to the significant and, perhaps, even unexpected success of Vladimir Putin, who, whether he planned it or not, has nevertheless managed to seriously intimidate Europe through his aggressive actions in Ukraine. And let us be honest, this effect has also been amplified by the constant stream of threats, not always articulated by Putin himself, but regularly voiced by his close associates, who continue to issue increasingly alarming and provocative statements directed at us. It is enough to recall Dmitry Medvedev, who for 4 years served as Putin's stand-in, and who recently made a completely absurd and provocative statement, suggesting that Iran could potentially receive nuclear weapons from certain allied nations, with Moscow, naturally, acting as the key intermediary in such a scenario. This tactic has proven effective. Even the leaders of Western European countries, who are not typically known for bold imagination or strategic foresight, have gradually begun to grasp the seriousness of the threat we are facing and to understand that concrete actions must be taken in response. In addition to all this, there is also the rather convoluted and, at times, bordering on hysterical foreign policy stance of Donald Trump, who has repeatedly hinted, and on occasion even explicitly threatened, that the United States may refuse to fulfill its obligations to defend Europe in the event of a crisis. Although the tone of rhetoric has shifted somewhat in recent times, the underlying concerns have not gone away. The time has clearly come for us to face reality and come to our senses. We are confronting a serious and growing threat posed by a so-called partner who is not only heavily armed, but also appears to be far from mentally stable. Regrettably, the only realistic way to put an end to this dangerous madness lies in making a difficult and politically unpopular decision, allocating 5% of each nation's gross domestic product to defense spending. We could certainly find more pleasant uses for this money than on missile systems we all hope will never be used. The prevailing thought is that if we have these weapons, we will not need to use them. But this is a collective effort, with a substantial contribution from Putin himself.
Let us get into more detail. What are your impressions following the discussions, the announcements, and the decision to allocate €50 billion for Ukraine, especially in the broader context?
The pledge of €50 billion in support of Ukraine certainly sounds encouraging and holds considerable promise for the future. But the reality remains unchanged. Europe does, in fact, possess the financial resources necessary to address this challenge. It has a lot of money. It can afford this and an even greater financial commitment. The question is, what will we do with it? What will we fill the bag with? What exactly are we going to supply for those funds? I have been saying for quite some time, 3 years ago we should have expanded defense production in Europe. It should have been developed in Poland. We should not have waited. But we did not see real, concrete action. Now we are learning that we lack the ammunition that Russia and its ally, North Korea, are producing in enormous quantities. We simply do not have such manufacturing capabilities. I believe there may be certain agreements, ones that we will not necessarily learn about, or at least not anytime soon, between Europe and the United States. A significant portion of this money will likely be spent on purchasing goods from the United States. The American economy is far more flexible and less restricted than the European one. They can ramp up production quickly. Take the example from the Second World War. Admiral Yamamoto said before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, "We will bomb Pearl Harbor, we will sink 3 aircraft carriers, but the United States will immediately build 30 more." And that principle of Yamamoto seems to hold true even today. So, what matters most is finding a use for this money, and not wasting time. Putin is doing all he can to press westward and, above all, to break through the front. He envisions a scenario reminiscent of the events of the Second World War, when, after long and exhausting battles, the front eventually collapsed, allowing Stalin's army to advance rapidly and decisively. That very same threat continues to loom over us today. This is precisely why all of these measures are not only necessary, but urgently required. And they are needed immediately, without further delay.
Will Russia respond to NATO's decision? I am referring to the increase in defense spending, the rearmament of the United Kingdom, which is also set to receive tactical weapons for its aircraft from the United States.
That is a very sound move. I am not a militarist. I view armament as something that prevents war, especially in today's circumstances. We are no longer dealing with combative and hot-blooded monarchs, for whom war was glory, fame, and everything else. Aside from Putin, those figures are gone. In any case, yes, Russia is already reacting in advance. What Putin said last week in St. Petersburg was complete nonsense. The strange thing is that no one opposes him, and it is all repeated in Russia. He claimed, for instance, that NATO has a total population of 340 million. That is actually the population of the United States alone, while NATO is 3 times that size. NATO spends a total of $1,400 billion on defense. Putin presented this as absurd, unnecessary, and excessive. He spoke of it in advance, knowing full well that those expenditures would be increased. He himself can still allow additional military spending, but it is very dangerous for him. I believe that he imagines he can keep raising defense spending. At that same forum in St. Petersburg last week, which was supposedly an international economic forum, although the participants were far from credible, Putin seemed more interested in shady actors and the underworld of terrorist circles. The president of Indonesia was also in attendance. However, despite his presence, the event could by no means be considered genuinely international in scope or representation. What happened there, however, was very interesting. Sharp disputes broke out among Putin's people. It is evident that there is division within his circle. Those responsible for the country's finances, for its economy, and for the money needed for war, are saying, enough. As Reshetnikov put it, we are on the brink of recession. Others are attempting to soften the message, speaking of an economic cooldown, of troubles and difficulties. But from what I know of their sentiment, and I do know something, the people in the economic and business sectors, including major enterprises and figures from the financial arms of government, are saying, enough. Enough of war, because they simply cannot afford it. Politically, it looks like this. They say that Putin could starve his own people and they would still follow. Russians are willing to endure enormous hardship. As Peskov put it, they would eat dirt and keep thinking only of victory. The war still enjoys popularity because it does not directly affect most Russians. Many are profiting from it. Many feel better because of it. But they are not truly sacrificing, except for one group, and that is the elderly. Among pensioners, the effects are painfully clear. They have grown significantly poorer due to the war. Even Putin understands this. He fears worsening public sentiment because that could turn against him. Take the current calls for mobilization. Patriots and bloggers are shouting, "Mobilization, mobilization," demanding at least 500,000 new troops, because the current situation is clearly not under control. But Putin knows that if he does this, he will face what he faced in September of the year 2022, a mass exodus of people and a dramatic collapse in patriotic morale. So objectively, they cannot afford to go much further. How far they are willing to go, and to what extent they are prepared to risk turning against their own society, I honestly cannot say. This particular question, I believe, is better left to the judgment of qualified psychiatrists.
Now, regarding the Polish people, can Poland and other countries on the front line of defense now feel safer?
God forbid. No. A sense of safety, believing that nothing threatens us anymore, that we have guarantees, is the most dangerous feeling imaginable. I personally know officers of the Russian army, and I know that their greatest dream, after as little as 200 grams of vodka, is to start discussing how Article 5 of the NATO Charter is nonsense, that no one will come to anyone's defense, that collective defense is just a myth. They say, it would be fun to try, to strike somewhere, to seize something, just to show the French, the Poles, and everyone else that Article 5 is a sham. That it does not apply, that you are in fact defenseless and entirely on your own. That is something we must never forget, it is still a reality. These people are in full military fervor. They feel they are succeeding, they believe they are doing well. The farther from the front, the more convinced they are that everything is going splendidly, and that can lead to dangerous outcomes. We must not be lulled into complacency. Above all, let us remember that Poland once had a fairly large defense industry. And why, after 3.5 years of war, we still have not re-established it, I truly cannot understand. It reflects very poorly on those responsible for Polish affairs. After all, it is also a massive business. Why do we not have solid, meaningful cooperation with Ukraine, especially in the area of drones? We could be providing significant support to Ukraine by producing as many drone components as possible right here in Poland. Components that, far from the front lines, we could safely and reliably manufacture. We should be developing this, learning from experience, and constantly creating something new. We should have been doing this long ago, and yet, we still have not. Instead, we sit and wonder what will be decided at the NATO summit. But NATO is us. We should not think of it as Uncle Sam coming to rescue us. This must be a joint effort that we take responsibility for ourselves.
And the threats of using nuclear weapons, could they intensify?
I am convinced there will be more threats. All it takes is for Medvedev to produce another batch. He is known for making his own moonshine and drinking it enthusiastically, and one Friday evening, he will make another nuclear threat. But I would not take that too seriously, because threats are one thing, and actual use is another. Putin might be prepared to use nuclear weapons, but only under the most extreme circumstances. If there were fighting near the gates of Moscow, then perhaps. But in general, I believe it is all about issuing threats and gauging the response. If fear begins to take hold, then it signifies that the unlaunched warheads have effectively reached their intended target. And, in my view, this is largely nothing more than a strategic game involving unlaunched warheads.
One final question. Russia's compensatory measures announced in response to the United Kingdom and NATO, what could they mean in practice? Putin claims he does not intend to attack, but they said the same thing before the year 2022.
There is one thing they are definitely capable of: expanding hybrid warfare. Unexplained fires and mysterious accidents happening across various parts of Europe, particularly targeting individuals whom Moscow openly dislikes. These are precisely the types of incidents we are referring to. They are almost certainly going to focus the majority of their efforts primarily on providing support to pro-Russian forces that are currently operating in the western regions. There is indeed a remarkably wide and diverse range of disruptive actions and tactics that they possess both the capability and willingness to undertake. And they are sufficiently brazen and audacious to actually go ahead and carry out these actions. That is precisely why we must remain extremely vigilant and exercise special caution. Because, as we have observed, recruiting individuals across Europe, including in countries like Poland, for a variety of covert and illicit activities appears to be something they manage with disturbing ease.
Thank you.